Welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. This week we don't have a lot going on. Honestly, it's kind of a weird transitionary week, which I think is nice comparative to last week. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely got by the astrology, which hasn't really happened to me in like a long time. At least not something that like I wasn't expecting or like I did myself. It was something that was very out of the blue. But anyway, last week it was a little bit crazy, and that was just the Mercury Cazimi for me. I'm recording this before the eclipse, so I have no idea what future Cameron's going to go through with the eclipse. But anyway, this week it's kind of a transitionary week. Not a lot happens really until the weekend, and then the weekend really launches us into a really extreme next week. Next week is when everything gets crazy. We kind of go into the craziness of January of 2022 and the rest of the year and all that kind of good stuff. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So we really just start this week off on Monday with the moon making a conjunction to Venus on Pluto. It's going to be making a sextile to Mars and Neptune at the same time. The biggest thing with this is, again, I kind of talked a little bit about this last week, and I think a lot of people kind of agreed with it with the creative energy. And I just think, Venus being on top of Pluto this whole week, technically the exact conjunction of Venus and Pluto happens this week. However, as it's kind of building up, there is this kind of sense of anxiety, the sense of power, the sense of fear, the sense of like, really kind of confronting something, right? Venus on top of Pluto. I think as the moon's conjoining Venus and making that sextile to Mars and making that sextile to Neptune, there is this kind of, I talked about this last week with the moon going into Capricorn, kind of checking out almost in a sense emotionally to, put the work in that you got to put in. I think as the moon's conjoining Venus and Capricorn, like, business is just business. You got to do what you got to do. And I think as the moon's on top of Venus, though, there is this sense of like, wanting to, I feel like we're all kind of at this point where, we all kind of know what's going on. We all kind of know what's not maybe necessarily what exactly is going to be shifting in our lives, but we understand it's, it was really funny. You ever read something online that like actually kind of like fucks you up a little bit? I read a fact online, and here's the honest truth. I don't know if this is a fact because, little small confession. One of my favorite Instagram pages to follow are like the Instagram pages that are like always truth facts, and it's nothing but like the most bullshit made up lies ever. It's the most enjoyable thing. It's just like nothing but big facts, and it's like lies. But anyway, there was this. It was like the same way a shark can smell like the way it was presented, it's kind of like humans can smell rain forming stronger than a shark can smell blood in the water, if that makes sense. I might be saying that wrong. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, I would love a little bit more info on that. But from what I read, it was kind of like how a shark smells so strong they can smell blood from miles and miles away. It's like, well, a human's ability to smell rain coming is even stronger. And like, for one, that just fucked me up, but that's just like a super, super, super cool fact. So cool. But anyway, as a human being, we know when the rain's coming, right? Like you feel that sensation, and you may not know where it's going to come from or when it's going to come or how heavy it's going to be, but you feel that sensation, right? And I just kind of feel that with this Venus retrograde right now. It's like, well, we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know exactly how it's going to all come down, but we know it's coming. And I just feel like with the moon conjoining Venus on Pluto, that's where a little bit of that is. And I think, the moon sextiling Mars, sextiling Neptune, for one part of it is it's very constructive, trying to get a lot of things done. But the other part of it is, like making sure you're crossing your T's, dotting your I's, making sure you have a plan. I think, one part of it though, too, that I can't emphasize this enough too, because of the, and this is why I've been trying to tell people, like, it is going to be, no matter what side of the spectrum of things that you're on, the fear is rampant right now. And you are going to be fed fear after fear after fear after fear, because that's the only way they can really get most things done now. On both sides, by the way. Like, I can't emphasize this enough, how much your anxieties and fears are profited off of. And when you look at this, when you look at the Mars, Pluto, Neptune, everything's just, it's like, if you're just like tripping right now, like everything's going to be fine. Like, number one, this is what I love about astrology. It's like, okay, yeah, we know this is going to be problems. And I know there's a lot of people like in the world that are going through really hard times. And I think the astrology reflects that. it's just one of those things where I just think it's really important to like know that you are afraid, know that you have fear going on, know where it's showing up in your life, right? Especially if it is showing up in your life. And where are you confronting it? Where are you facing it? Or are you letting fear kind of program a lot of your thinking and a lot of what's next for you? It's just one of those things. I think as the moon's on top of Venus and on top of Pluto with all of this Pluto Neptune stuff, you know, what are you being like, what are you seeing? Moon's in Capricorn, right? The moon's in detriment. The moon is uncomfortable, right? The moon has this, you know, sense of like not feeling safe, not feeling comfortable. So it's just one of those things. Like, just kind of check in a little bit and ask yourself, you know, like, are you kind of tripping or not? I don't think there's a lot to trip about at this moment. Not to say that there's not a lot of bad things going on in this world. But Monday, I just think as the moon's on top of Venus, sextiling Mars, you know, you just got to do what you got to do, really. Again, this isn't the biggest week in the world, but it's leading up to a really, really big week. Oh, whoops, I keep pushing the wrong button. There we go. We get into Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we're going to have the moon ingress into Aquarius. It's then going to conjoin Saturn, square Uranus, like it always does in 2021. But also on Tuesday, we have Mercury square Neptune and Mars square Jupiter. Now, these are the big transits of this week. What's funny is that it's just these transits didn't look like. On Wednesday, it's just a lunar transit. Thursday, just a lunar transit. Friday, just a lunar transit. And then Saturday, we get into bigger stuff. But like Tuesday and Saturday are really the big days. And Tuesday, it's just the moon goes into Aquarius. And we know what that's like. It's like almost every single time the moon goes into Aquarius, something, you guys know what it's like. Conjoined Saturn, squares Uranus, Mercury square Neptune, Mars square Jupiter. Those aren't the worst transits in the world, but they're definitely like a little interesting. So let's go into it. Like I said, the moon's going to ingress into Aquarius. And, you know, like there's nothing fun about the Aquarius sign right now. And I don't think Jupiter leaving is going to help that at all. I think Jupiter being in Aquarius is making it a little bit more like optimistic. But I think as the moon goes into Aquarius and conjoined Saturn, there's this sense of, you know, either feeling isolated or like locked in. Like you're either trapped or you're blocked out. That moon conjoining Saturn is definitely like, what are you taking seriously? What do you need to confront? Where do you need to mature? As the moon first ingresses into Aquarius, conjoins Saturn, it's going to take a while until it actually gets to Saturn. But then once it hits Saturn, we're getting to that point where here, let me show you guys. So I think I talked a little bit about this, I think maybe in the summer or maybe a couple of weeks ago, about how Saturn and Uranus they had a little bit of distance on them, right? So it took a while for the moon to hit Saturn and then go and hit Uranus versus, you know, something else I wanted to bring up this week is how, you know, we're building up to that Saturn-Uranus square again. Like there's still plenty of more to unpack, but I think as the moon first goes into Aquarius, there's this like longing sense of knowing what has to happen. And it takes a while for the moon it's almost like the moon Saturn conjunction to the square to Uranus is like the last thing that happens, which is kind of important because the other thing is Mercury is going to be squaring Neptune. Here's the thing with Mercury squaring Neptune. Like, you guys know what I'm going to say. Like, it's just like, okay, what are you seeing? Is that really what you're seeing? Is that not what you're seeing? For one, I think this is good for creativity. I know for someone like me, I make videos, so I'm going to kind of enjoy this transit. I might make something stupid or I might fuck up something, but I think Mercury in Sag is this, you know, Mercury's trying to communicate, right? It's in detriment in Sagittarius. It's trying to communicate this big image. It's squaring Neptune. It's not kind of lining up. I think when it comes to communication with other people, it's going to be a little bit choppy. Well, it's kind of like, and it's maybe not the wrong information. It's just maybe the way it's presented causes something, right? It's kind of like, you know, you ever have someone in a family, well, it's holiday season. You ever have a family member just like say something out loud and you're like, you're not supposed to say that. But here we are. Here we go. That's the Mercury and Sag squaring Neptune. The problem though with Mercury and Sag squaring Neptune is that like, it's just going to cause more confusion. And maybe I think what's being communicated, what's being expressed is like, it's Mercury and Sag squaring Neptune and Pisces is like, what's a good way to bring this up? It's someone who is maybe uninformed on a topic, communicating something about that topic to someone else who knows nothing about that topic. There's like a false pretense, or something's not right, something's confusing. There's just something about Tuesday where, like, I think either for one, if you're communicating with someone, no one's like let's say if there's a disagreement, it's truly because there's something that someone's not seeing, whether it's you not seeing something or they're not seeing something. Mercury squaring Neptune is like, just the vision isn't lining up. The other thing is Mars is going to be squaring Jupiter, where there is this the problem with Mars squaring Jupiter is there's literally this resistance to integrate, right? Jupiter is in Aquarius, where, let's be honest, if Jupiter, I'm making a video about this right now, and so I've got a lot of thoughts about Jupiter and Aquarius, because I'm making a video about Jupiter and Pisces. I hope you guys are excited about it. But anyway, Jupiter and Aquarius has just been like trying to see the glass half full with a lot of the Saturn Aquarius stuff. Like, hey, we got to do what we got to do. This is this. And, this is the way it is. And Jupiter and Aquarius is like, things aren't that bad. Like, come on, it's okay. We can make the best of it. But Mars in Scorpio squaring Jupiter in Aquarius is kind of like, no, like Mars in Scorpio squaring Jupiter in Aquarius from that superior position is like, you can't bullshit Mars. You can't bullshit Mars. And Jupiter in Aquarius is just like trying to like make things maybe appear better than they are. And Mars in Scorpio is just not going to have that. So I think as Mercury is in Sag squaring Neptune, it's like, if the point isn't clear, if the line isn't clear, if things aren't distinct, and that's the thing that Mars and Scorpio needs. Like Mars and Scorpio needs that clarity. And I think that's the hardest part about a lot of the Sagittarius stuff with the Neptune stuff is trying to figure out what's clear and what's not clear. Also too, Venus on top of Pluto is like, there's like this anxiousness already kind of forming underlying everything. But I think as Mars squares Jupiter, there's going to be this not this resistance to want to integrate, to want to conform. I think Jupiter and Aquarius too is like, I think the hard part about this too, about this week with the Venus Pluto stuff, the fear stuff is like Jupiter and Aquarius is like, you're trying to see the best of a situation that you can. And I think Mars squaring that's going to pop that bubble. You know what I mean? But the thing is, Mercury in Sagittarius squaring Neptune is like also exaggerating that a lot. So like, okay, like if let's say you go to Tuesday and you're like, and it's a hard day, don't get too exaggerated with it. Like it's not like, I just feel like Mercury in Sagittarius squaring Neptune is like a little over the top when it's like, explaining what's bad or what's, how things are. That's not to say like Mars squaring Jupiter is definitely like not necessarily the most positive transit. It's not the worst transit, but it definitely seems like if Jupiter rules ideals, right? And Mars rules like, well, needles, ironically, but I was using that as an analogy of like popping a bubble. Like Mars in Scorpio squaring Jupiter and Aquarius is like popping a bubble. We also have to remember the Mars-Jupiter opposition. When Jupiter was at 20, so Jupiter, we have to remember, let's go back to July 29th, I think it was. When Jupiter retrogressed into Aquarius, the same day Mars made its opposition. That was when masks came back. That was when the Delta variant was going crazy. Mars square Jupiter again. We're going to have, I think, more of that, but I also think there's going to be this kind of like, what's going to go on this winter is going to be very, very wild, but we'll see what actually ends up happening. But I just think Mars squaring Jupiter on a personal level is like, for one, I think it's going to be hard to see like the positive side of a lot of things, but Mars squaring Jupiter too is like, what you kind of have, like Jupiter's trying to get you to see the glass half full. Mars and Scorpio is like, confront the things that you're frustrated with, confront the things that you're upset with. In my opinion, I think the moon's going to be conjoining Saturn. We're going to be in a grumpy attitude all fucking day anyway. And, moon's conjoining Saturn. We're just kind of facing a lot of realities, I think. I just think while the Mercury squaring Neptune, being able to communicate it or express it is going to be difficult. Being able to, it's going to be a weird day. It's a weird square, right? Like it's like Mars square Jupiter's not the worst. Mercury square Neptune's not the worst. I do think Mercury squaring Neptune's blown out of proportion a little bit. So we'll see what ends up happening with that. But with Tuesday, I just think Tuesday might just be exhausting. It's going to be like mental gymnastics all day long and nothing but fighting. And so that leads us to Wednesday. So here's the thing about Wednesday. Again, what's weird about this week is like on Wednesday, we just have the moon making that conjunction to Jupiter, making a square to Mars, which again, I just think kind of reiterates everything else that I was just saying. But then Like Thursday, moon will go into Pisces. Friday, the moon will only really be conjoining Neptune. So we kind of get like a nice couple days break after that. If like we're being literal, like there's literally only so many things that are going on. So like Wednesday, the moon pretty much does not conjoin Jupiter and square Mars until the very, very end of the day, really. I mean, like it's this 11:30 a.m. And so like, watch, let's go. Yeah, it takes a while, not even until like the very late evening. And I think the thing is with this is, as the moon's conjoining Jupiter, it's trying to see a bigger picture here. I think as the moon squares Mars, there might be some like cynicism or some kind of like just irritability that's kind of like, well, because here's the other thing with this, right? Like there are appropriate times to like this is something that I really admire out of people who can be very upfront and blunt with their anger and then immediately get over it. Because there is a time and place for it, right? It is appropriate at certain times, but then there is a time and place to get over it. You know what I mean? And so I think as the moon starts to apply to Jupiter, there is this sense of kind of like, okay, let's figure this out. How can we make the best of the situation? How can we make both sides happy? How can we see both ways? What is the spirit of the law here? I think the moon conjoining Jupiter too is again just trying to see how can we make this better, right? Jupiter in Aquarius is like Jupiter's trying to give you something, and I just think as it's in Saturn sign, it's like, you got to do what you got to make do with what you have. It's not Jupiter in Capricorn where it's like, yeah, you kind of are dealing with like recycled secondhand stuff. Jupiter in Aquarius is like, well, there's a little bit of things that you can kind of do, but still have to make the most of it. I think as the moon conjoins Jupiter, trying to see a better side, trying to be more optimistic. The only problem is the moon's going to conjoin Jupiter and then make a square to Mars, where there is this kind of sense of like, I think it might be hard to kind of, I think on Wednesday, there's going to be this emphasis of trying to see the bigger picture, trying to have a little bit more hope. But then as the moon makes that square to Mars, and then once it makes that square to Mars, it'll be void for just a couple hours. So it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's a little weird. Like, it's kind of like you're trying to reconcile, right? With like what can be and what is, what's going to happen. Mind you, all of this is building up. I mean, Venus is on top of Pluto right now. Mars is about to ingress into Sagittarius, conjoin that south node. That's later on next week, right? Jupiter's about to ingress into Pisces. We're about to have so many things all click over right now. So just like, again, this is why I use that rain analogy. Like, if you feel like the rain's coming, it is. And like, this is just a build up process to that. This is building up momentum to that. So anyway, I think Wednesday is probably just going to be like trying to see things maybe in a bigger picture, trying to be more optimistic, idealistic, but things maybe not necessarily clicking all the way. I think Mars and Scorpios are still not necessarily going to be really happy about most of it. That really brings us to Thursday, where on Thursday, the moon will just really ingress into Pisces. And I was kind of looking through this, and I mean, we could look at it together too. It's really the only thing. Like, here, let me do this. So as the moon goes into Pisces, we'll do this. Go by the day. Yeah, see, it's 6 p.m. at this point on Thursday, and the moon not doing anything. It will square the nodes right when it ingresses into Pisces, but like whatever. It takes a while for the moon to make any type of transit to any sign. Now, what's interesting is on Saturday, like when the moon is getting ready to leave Pisces, it's going to like conjoin Neptune and then sextile Venus and then square Mercury and trine Mars. And it's going to do a lot of stuff. So this moon in Pisces transit starting on Thursday is actually really important because it kind of ramps up to a lot of things. But what's like, I'm going to tell you right now, Thursdays are nothing's going to happen. Well, I don't want to say nothing's going to happen because it's going to be like the one day like something happens. But like Thursday is just like something that I'm actually working on with my Jupiter video is kind of describing Pisces by comparing it to Sagittarius and how Sagittarius is kind of like linear time, right? I think of it, if we were going to think of it as like a game, it's like Temple Run, right? Versus Jupiter and Pisces is much more non-linear. It's much more, I think of it as like Minecraft, right? There's no end or beginning, and you have this abundance of resources and you can kind of do whatever you want versus like, Temple Run is just like run, but very Sagittarius, right? So I think as the moon's in Pisces, there is the sense of kind of like being in between places, kind of like being in this place of like, okay, where am I at? But having like the the energy and the environment to kind of like settle yourself in. I mean, the moon's not really making any aspects at this point. So Thursday's just kind of like maybe basking in your emotions a little bit. It is going to be a little touchy-feely. It's the moon in Pisces. So just you're going to feel a little bit all over the place. You might want to check out a little bit too, because that's what the moon does. So Thursday's just like weird, right? Which that leads us to Friday, which Friday doesn't necessarily add anything more to that. Or I should say it does add to that. It doesn't necessarily change that. If anything, it just kind of exacerbates it a little bit more. So we get to Friday, and the whole day, the moon's going to be squaring Neptune. It will technically be squaring the sun too, but I just think that's also added on top of like, this is the sun's about to square Neptune. So here's the thing. Sun's in Sagittarius squaring Neptune in Pisces, right? So in astrology, we can oftentimes really interpret squares as bad things. But if you are coming from that line of thought, then you also, if it's got to make sense, right? You got to have the same, your line of thinking has got to make sense in every way that you apply it, right? So the idea of a square being bad is like saying criticism is bad, right? When you look at the Sagittarius squaring Neptune, or Sagittarius and Pisces kind of squaring each other, there is this sense that certain visions or ideals may not always kind of line up. Same thing with beliefs, right? And that's fine. But oftentimes those squares, those conflicts can kind of really chisel out and clarify a little bit more of what something is, right? So for example, if Sagittarius and Pisces are all about envisioning and idealizing, I think as the moon's conjoining Neptune, squaring the sun in Sagittarius, there can be a little bit more of a defining of what that is, because there is a lack of clarity, right? There is I think as the moon conjoins Neptune, there is the sense of like kind of being a little bit oversaturated with what's going on, being a little bit, again, lost in the sauce a little bit. And as it's squaring sun in Sagittarius, there's the sense of like, the Sagittarius spirit is literally like going, like just adventure, go, do first, ask questions later. And the thing is, the sun and Sag squaring moon, like this is kind of like the moon in Pisces squaring sun and Sag is like, hey, this isn't the right, like we were going this way and this isn't where we ended up going. Where are we? Why are we here? What's going on? And this is going to force like the sun is our ego. The sun is our pride. And in Sagittarius, it's like, yeah, we're going to do this. And things are like that. This is the time of the year too, where everyone's like my New Year's resolutions, and I'm going to be this way and everything's going to be great. And anyway, I just think there's this kind of sense of things not necessarily kind of really adding up, and you having to be a little bit more clear about where are you going? Like, you can't just be like lost in the clouds all day long. Like, and this is the thing. Venus is on top of Pluto. The exact conjunction still hasn't happened yet. This is on Friday. But I think on Friday, so again, the planetary things are not happening yet. It's all sun and moon stuff. It's all emotions. It's all like personal stuff that you're going to feel inside. I think Friday is a day where you kind of go, here's a way to put it. You might realize that you're lost, or you might realize that you didn't go down like the right trail, or that you realize that maybe the trail you're going down isn't the one that you want to go down. Or maybe you realize, like I would really just say it's the day where you kind of feel it inside that things aren't lining up. Like, it's one of those times that you can't ignore it, right? Like certain times where you can go, where where your intuition might say, oh, this isn't a good idea. And sometimes you go, oh, I'll just ignore that. I'm just going to keep going anyway, right? And sometimes that's the better decision. But I think at this point on Friday, there is the sense of like, something's not lining up. And so, like, there's a lack of clarity on what that is. And it's really interesting, right? Because that brings us to Saturday. And again, what's so interesting about all of this to me is there's like nothing that really happens. It's all lunar transits on like Thursday and Friday, right? And then Saturday, a bunch of things happen. Sunday is a transitionary point. And then, like next week, so much shit happens next week. Whoops, wrong button. We'll do this. So we get to Saturday. Moon's going to make a square to Mercury. It's going to trine Mars. It's going to sextile Venus. Moon's going to then ingress into Aries. Mercury is going to sextile Jupiter. Venus is going to conjoin Pluto. And the sun is going to square Neptune. That is kind of, for one, it's a mouthful, but it is truly a lot going on. Did I just like whistle in like that was weird. Anyway, as we get to Saturday, right? Let's actually rewind a little bit before the moon ingresses into Aries. So as we get into like early Saturday morning, Moon's going to trine Mars. Well, first, what is it first going to do? It does like so many things. I think it first sextile Venus. Yeah, it makes a sextile to Venus, then a square to Mercury, then a trine to Mars, right? So I feel bad for the mercurial people here because this is not about this is nothing about this is like, oh, this makes sense. This all lines up on paper. Go for it. This is like Moon in Pisces is sextiling Venus in Capricorn, trining Mars in Scorpio, and it's squaring Mercury in Sag. It's kind of like taking a blind shot. I don't want to say taking a leap of faith. It's not necessarily that, but this is definitely like the Moon in Pisces trining Mars, squaring Mercury, right? That's kind of like taking an impulsive action based off like an emotion that doesn't necessarily make sense. That's not necessarily rational, right? But that's the whole MO of Mercury and Sagittarius. Maybe we're not supposed to do things in like rational ways. But anyway, that's a different story. I think the Moon squaring Mercury here, though, is like, well, I think on Saturday, I think I think the thing is with this is I think if you're trying to make sense of it all, of like maybe what you're doing, or like it's just not going to work, you're going to run yourself in circles, versus this is much more of like, hey, just do it. You know what I mean? I can't tell people enough when it comes to God, really anything. Like you got to just do it. You can't think about it. You got to just do it. Same thing. I mean, like with doing YouTube videos or being an astrologer, like, you know, just start doing readings, start making videos, just push record, just do it. And so this is something that I learned in a couple of the personal development courses that I've taken, was this saying called, and this is something I said earlier, of knowing fear, like no fear, KNOW, no fear, and do it anyway. Like that's the whole thing with this. I think this is also, I mean, like Venus is on top of Pluto. Like you're going to be like, Pluto rules fear, Pluto rules power, Pluto rules corruption, Pluto rules this intensity, right? And for a lot of you, it's going to be manifesting as fear. For a lot of you, and I mean, like the other thing too is I think this with the Sun squaring Neptune, trying to make sense of it all and trying to be clear about everything. It's like, you guys, I'm sure, have you ever been in a position where, well, maybe you haven't been put in a position, but I'm sure you can relate to, like, let's say it's a movie trope, because I've seen this on TV and movies a lot, where like a character is forced to make a split decision and they're confused with all the facts that are surrounding them. So they just kind of do something different instead. That's really what this looks like. Like you're not necessarily, you know, I think you're going to be bombarded with different, like, you know, with this, like, this is true. No, this is true. No, that's not true. No, this is, and like, you gotta make that shit up for yourself. Like you can't, I think if you're with Mercury and Sagittarius, Moon and Pisces, if you're just trying to get by and skate by with what you think with what, you know, is the most idealistic thing, like it's just not going to work. I just think the Moon making that square to Mercury, like making a rational decision, things trying to be clear and make sense isn't happening here. I think the thing is, though, the Moon in Pisces trining Mars is like, I think if you're going to emotionally react, you could do this, which that might not be good. But for other people, this is going to be like, hey, you need to get out of your head and you need to just do it anyway. You don't need to like just go for it and figure it out later. You know what I mean? And I think with Venus on top of Pluto, you know, that's what I talked about with my Venus video. It's like, you don't need a fucking plan. You don't need to play by the rules. You don't need to, you know, sure, Venus in Capricorn wants to do everything by the system and structure, wants everything to play by the rules, but like, that's just not how it's going to be. Like, you know, it may not always work like that. And so I think as the Moon sextiles Venus, there is this kind of sense of like understanding how to, you know, take advantage of whatever stepping stones that you kind of have in front of you. But, you know, Saturday, I mean, hold on, let's go back to it. So the Moon's I got to go over all the transits again. So the Moon's going to square Mercury. Well, first it will sextile Venus and then square Mercury and then trine Mars. So it's like, okay, this isn't going to make sense, but I'm going to do it anyway. Then the Moon goes into Aries on Saturday, where there's this kind of supercharged, whoa, I'm here. I'm like Moon in Aries is very like, I'm here, like I'm awake, like what's going on? So I think it kind of maybe takes that to kind of like that, again, maybe a leap of faith is a good way to analogize it. Maybe it takes that kind of leap of faith, that kind of push to kind of get going. But then Mercury's also going to sextile Jupiter. And I like Mercury sextiling Jupiter because here's the thing. This is something too that at this point in the day, between late Saturday afternoon and going into Sunday, Mercury is at the galactic center. If you guys are familiar with Dane Rudger, he's got one of my favorite books on this, which is The Star is also, The Sun is also a Star. I know some of you might be like, Cameron, whoa, are you just quoting a modern astrologer? Yeah, I'm a Dane Rudger fan, but I'm also a 29 Sag rising, and that's why. But to talk about the Galactic Center idea for a second, is kind of like, this is, so 27, 28 Sagittarius is where, if you look at the night sky, it's where the center of the Milky Way galaxy is, right? Like Dane Rudger, he's kind of, I mean, if you think people are woke nowadays, Dane Rudger was like so fucking heady. So heady, if you haven't read one of his books. But the idea of the Galactic Center is kind of like this oneness of everything. This kind of like, he kind of puts it as like this concentrated spiritual realm. Like, you know, you're kind of just looking at life through this very universal lens, like not necessarily through I think a solar system lens. You're looking at it through a galactic lens is like one way that he kind of put it. And so I just think as Mercury's in Sagittarius here, you know, there's certain things that's just human nature, right? It's just kind of like universal nature. And here's me getting a little bit of woo-woo for you guys. But like, I think as Mercury's sextiling Jupiter, like Mercury's in Jupiter's sign and it's on top of the galactic center, there's this kind of like, you just kind of have to trust things. And Mercury, because I think with Mercury and Sag, like there is no rationalizing shit. Like there is none of that. Like when people that's what I love about conversation. I love when people are like, oh, there's no aliens in the universe, or and then people are like, oh, there are these powerful life forms, and then they go into like that they control us and everything. And it's just like, stop trying to make sense of it. Like we don't, like, stop. Like as far as humans go, making sense of anything outside of our solar system is going to take thousands, if not millions of years, because that is so beyond our realm of comprehension. So I think with Mercury and at this galactic center, sextiling Jupiter is like, hey, I think a way to get with Jupiter and Aquarius, it's like, hey, how do you just get through something, right? Mercury and Sagittarius is like, don't rationalize it. Don't try to make sense of it. And this is something I've talked about. You guys have heard me talk about. Like sometimes just bad things happen, and like for a lot of people, a bad thing will happen to them and they think like that they deserved it, or like they're like, why does the universe like hate me or whatever? And it's like, well, it's not really about that. It's just kind of like sometimes even trying to make sense of something like that can, I don't know, make it worse, because sometimes it's not really about that. Like, don't make it about yourself. But anyway, I just think Mercury sextiling Jupiter on Saturday is like, don't try to make sense of, just do it. Don't think about it. Like, there's no need to explain. There's no need to, there's no need to explain things. Just go. You know what I mean? Anyway, the other thing is the sun's going to square Neptune. And I think you're just going to be overwhelmed with confusion anyway. The sun and Sag squaring, it's a lot of loud noises. It's a lot of people yelling at you. It's just, you just kind of have to do what you got to do. It's just, don't go on anyone's schedule. Just go when you got to go, right? Saturday's a lot of things happening though. But let's talk about Sunday. Because Sunday, what's interesting about Sunday, moon's going to be sextiling Saturn. Not really that big of a deal, but that's good. Mercury's good again, going to be at that like galactic center area, that 27, 28 Sag area. And Mars is going to be at 29 Scorpio. Now, when it comes to astrology, number one, this shit has been around for thousands of years. So when people go, oh, 29 Scorpio is important for an heretic degree, or it's there's so many, there's a lot of things when it comes to this. So like, a lot of people just think it's like one way or the highway. Like some people then are into like degree theory, and then there's this. It's like sometimes I get frustrated as an astrologer because there's so many different ways of interpreting this, right? And then like not a lot of people are actually like figuring out where it all comes from and where it all stems from. And I'm not trying to sit here and say one thing's better than another, or even what I use, but I wanted to bring up Mars being at 29 Sag for a specific reason, because not 29 Sag, 29 Scorpio, because most people would agree that things really climax at this point, and that things really intensify specifically for Mars in Scorpio. I think no matter what system that you're kind of using. And the thing is, Mars, after it hits this point where things get this extreme, not only goes into Sag, but conjoins the South Node, which is like, I feel like Mars 29 Scorpio is like giving it all you have, and then Mars going into Sagittarius in the South Node is like collapsing. Not collapsing because you're too weak or something like that, but because you gave it your all. Like, the big thing on Sunday is, again, Mercury's at this area. We're really thinking in a meta way, really getting spiritual, really getting kind of deep, because this is also kicking us up in this Capricorn stuff. Venus is on top of Pluto here. I meant to say this about Saturday, but Venus on top of Pluto is like, hey, are we going to let, like, it's just, well, it's super, what's hard about astrology is talking about the transiting stuff without talking about like current like events happening, because there's just so many literal things that are happening. Like, it's just so literal, right? But there is this sense of Venus in Capricorn, right? Venus wants to have this tradition, have this rule, have this way of doing things. And I think as Venus is on top of Pluto, it's like, that's not how it's going to be. The powers that be will not have that. And I think it's about, you got to change how you play by the rules, right? You got to change how things kind of go. And I think as Venus is on top of Pluto, there's kind of like a realization of that. I think as Mars is on top of 29 Scorpio, Mercury's at the, I think there's just kind of like things are really settling in at this point. Like, and like, cause I feel like a lot of this week is really just kind of like, if you're not already on that level of like, again, if you smell the rain coming and you're in denial that the rain's coming, like, this week is about you kind of accepting that the rain's coming. And I think if you resist that, I think it'll only be a little bit more difficult for you. But I mean, a lot of things, and this is what's also interesting too, is, and this is why I bring a lot of like 29 Scorpio Mercury at this point is, I mean, we get to next week and literally Mercury goes into Capricorn, Mars goes into Sagittarius, Mars conjoins the South Node. We have the full moon in Gemini, the first lunation in Sagittarius and Gemini that's not an eclipse. And then we have Venus stationing retrograde. That's like, again, like full, like that's just so many things are really, and then right after that, I mean, that's pretty much like the week after that, it's like Mercury enters shadow and Jupiter enters Pisces. So it's just like, there's so many things going on. And this, I feel like this week is that, I don't want to say the calm before actually I would say the calm before the storm. Maybe that moon in Pisces transit really is, that kind of moment of things being in between places and right before things really switch. Cause next week is really when things switch. So I just think a lot of this week is just, well, again, it's the Mars square Jupiter. Like, if you are mad or frustrated, or if there's some type of issue or some type of, like, you just got to confront that, right? Like Mars squaring Jupiter, some bubbles are going to pop, some things are going to make sense, and you're just going to have to rationalize it later, deal with it later, like what we do with most of our problems, right? But God, I feel like I had an announcement, and like before I started recording this, I totally forgot what it is. So anyway, thank you guys so much for being here, liking, sharing. Please like this. If you like my weekly horoscopes, please give this a like. I like the algorithm liking me, and I've been doing good lately. So if I keep doing good, it'll only like throw me out there more. So like it, comment, let me know what I want to know what you guys are feeling too, because I've been seeing a lot of just the comments I'm getting lately are really, really interesting. And again, I do read them. I don't always interact with them because it's kind of overwhelming to do all the time. But anyway, with that being said, I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.